I love a good filler game. It can serve as a great appetizer at the start of your game night before everyone jumps into the latest heavy euro. It's a perfect dessert at the end of a night when everyone's brain is already pretty burnt out. And it's also a great snack to go along with some beer and friends at the local pub. What I'm trying to say with the overused food metaphors is that fillers are, by far, the most versatile type of board game in any gamer's collection. So in this video, I'd like to take a little bit of time to talk about the ones I consider to be a must-have. As with any good top 10, you must have an honorable mention, a game that just barely missed the list. And my pick here is Decrypto. Decrypto is brilliant, the great core premise of breaking opponents' code, the awesome board you slot word cards into that instantly grabs people's attention, the brilliant gameplay where as the clue setter you're trying to make things obvious enough that your team can easily guess the word order, but not so obvious that the opponent team can figure it out as well. It all works together so well and makes for a game that easily keeps its players engaged throughout. So, why did it fall short of the actual list then? Well, in my opinion, Decrypto is at its best when both sides have at least one player who knows the rules well or has played the game before, and that makes it a bit more difficult to introduce to new players without one team potentially ending up with an unfair advantage. Right, with that out of the way, let's jump into the real deal with my number 10. I love Railroad Inc. I also hate Railroad Inc. It is so good at making you feel really clever as you're drawing your little roads on the board, planning ways to connect it all together into one vast network. And really dumb when you see that actually everything you planned was absolute garbage and you're gonna end the game with more dead ends than your average business grad's career prospects. And yet, the game is never not fun. The puzzle aspect of putting all the roads together is engaging. The extra roads you can choose from gives players enough flexibility that your network won't be an absolute car crash at the end. And the fact that most dice rolls will suck equally for all players almost develops a sense of camaraderie with your opponents. Oh, and each box comes with 2 expansion modules, so you also get plenty of variety straight out of the box. My number 9 is a game that hits the table pretty often whenever we're waiting for someone else to arrive or looking for a cooldown game after a 3-hour Euro. And Deep Sea Adventure has never disappointed, always delivering lots of memorable moments in a very short playtime. You will always have someone get overly ambitious and dive too greedily and too deep, inevitably running out of oxygen before they make their way back. You'll have someone run out of oxygen while being just one tile away from the boat, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. And you'll have someone take on seemingly unreasonable risks, only to prove everyone wrong and come back with a bigger haul than anyone could imagine. But the best part of Deep Sea Adventure is that as much as you are playing a game, you're playing the other players more. Every game we've had has had players goading each other into going deeper or laughing at those too cowardly to dive for the real good stuff. Or, my favorite, goad someone into diving deeper, then turn around and start heading back to the boat, likely leaving the poor sucker stranded at the bottom of the sea. My number 8 is a weird game. Hell, some people have argued that it's not really even a game, but I have had so many good moments with the mind that it had to be included in the list. Its premise should not work. You and the rest of the players have to play cards from your hand in sequential order, but you're not allowed to communicate in any way. And the first few tries often don't go all that well. But then it starts to click. You start to understand how other players are thinking, who's more of a risk taker and who's a bit more careful, and it all starts to fall together, delivering some of the most satisfying moments I've had in gaming, as the entire group manages to correctly play cards that were all within 1 or 2 numbers of each other. Walking away from the mind, you feel like you've gotten to know the rest of the people around the table a little bit better, and I think that more than justifies its place on the top 10. The next game on the list is likely one of the most played games in my collection. Sure, a large chunk of those plays are down to me spending 3 days demoing it at a convention, but Scout is such a Moorish game that I can't help but want to play it again. Its core idea that you're stuck playing the hand you were dealt with the card order it was dealt in is so simple, yet absolutely original, and you'd think this would result in an absolute luckfest of a game. You're meant to be playing cards in sets or runs after all, but the fact that cards have a value on top and bottom, and you get to choose which side you're playing at the start of the round, gives everyone that little bit of control you need to make the game more engaging. And the fact that you can pick up other players' cards and put them anywhere in your hand, whichever way round you choose, adds a nice layer of strategy to the game, making players consider when it's better to pick up a card and set yourself up for a big play next round instead of playing a smaller hand now. The only reason it's not higher on the list is that I found people can sometimes struggle to grok some of the rules, especially around the general power hierarchy of the cards and the idea of picking up cards to improve their hands from an explanation alone, and you're almost better off just jumping straight into a game and teaching everyone as they play. In my experience, after a couple of hands, most people will have picked it up and will, more than likely, want to play a few more games. No list of filler games would be complete without one Night Werewolf on it. It takes the basic rules of Werewolf, gets rid of all the murder, of having all eliminated players just sit and watch the rest have fun for 20 minutes, shoves a ton of different roles into it, and condenses the whole thing into a quick 5-minute experience. Just last week, I had one of my most memorable games of One Night Werewolf ever. I introduced a few friends to the game, and if you've ever taught this to anyone before, you probably know how that usually goes. At least one player inevitably gets something wrong, wakes up at the wrong time, or does something incorrect and throws the whole thing off. Except, in this game, the two werewolf players didn't get anything wrong. They bluffed that they did and laughed their way to victory. I have never seen anyone else actually use a strategy of weaponized incompetence, but it made for such a memorable night. And with the right group, One Night Werewolf never fails to deliver at least a few memorable moments each time you pull it out of the box. Next up, how about a good beer and pretzels type game, something you can pull out when some friends come over and continue playing without it getting in the way of you catching up? Well, I think No Thanks fits that bill pretty well. The game is deceptively simple. A card comes out and everyone continues putting down chips on it until someone finally takes the card. Each card is worth its value in negative points and each chip you have is a positive point. Any cards you have in sequential order will only score the lowest printed value. And that's basically it. However, despite the simple rules, there's still a decent bit to consider when playing No Thanks. Like, how many chips do the rest of the players have? Who'd actually benefit from picking that card up? At what point has the card accumulated enough chips that it becomes worth picking it up? And can you send it round another time or two to get some more chips on it without someone else tapping it? No Thanks may not have flashy components or art or some super cool ideas behind it, but it has been a very reliable filler that I will happily pull out whether I'm playing with experienced gamers or people who have never touched a board game before in their lives. One Night Ultimate Werewolf is great, but I've found it doesn't work as well with some groups. Some people just don't enjoy bluffing and find it too hard to keep track of what every other role in the game could do. In that scenario, I have found my next pick, Werewords, to be a much better fit for the group. It takes the secret identities from your typical werewolf or mafia and marries it with a word guessing game, making it so the goal for the good guys is to guess the word said by the mayor, while the werewolf is subtly trying to ask questions that would lead them off track, and the seer is trying to guide the team to the right answer. It also introduces an extra winning condition, in that the losing side can turn it around if, at the end of the game, they guess who either the seer or the werewolf were. What I like best about Werewords is that it ends up being a very inclusive game. All of the players around the table get into asking questions and trying to figure out what the word could be. It also does not sacrifice any of its social deduction roots, as the werewolf and the seer still have to play a subtle, clever game, while the rest of the players have to stay aware of what kind of questions everyone else is asking to help them figure out who's led the team astray. Looking at the games I have in the top 3, I can't help but notice that in one way or another, they all seem to build on the ideas behind the games that came earlier on in the list, just dialing up the elements I love to an even higher degree. For instance, my number 3 pick, 6 Nimmt, is another perfect pub game with a super simple rule set, like No Thanks. In 6 Nimmt, all you gotta do is play cards from your hand that then get assigned to a row that already has the closest preceding value card. The only wrinkles to this are that if your card is the 6th in a particular row, you take the entire row, scoring negative points. And if your card is the lowest one on the table, you have to pick a row to take, replacing it with your new card. So, why is 6 Nimmt higher on the list than No Thanks then? Well, I personally think it's a more interactive game. There's a lot more opportunity to screw with other players, whether on purpose or not, and there's always a good amount of banter as players moan about being screwed over or celebrate getting revenge on another player. It also takes a page out of Scout's book, in that the game is light enough for anyone to get involved, but at the same time has enough depth that you do have the potential for some big satisfying plays and setups for future rounds, instead of just randomly playing cards from your hand. Six Nimmt is a game I will happily take to any game night. It's easy to teach, the tiny box makes it an easy addition, and the fact that it goes all the way up to 10 makes for a nice change to constantly playing social deduction games with a big group of players, while keeping the inherent interactivity those games usually have. I'll admit, recency bias might have played a role in this game making it all the way to second place, but at the same time, Clover is an incredibly fun game to play, combining a lot of my favorite aspects of any good filler game. The premise is simple. You have 4 cards, arrange them randomly on your Clover, and write down a word that, in some way, would connect the words on adjacent cards. Then you mix in another card or two, give them all a good shuffle, spread them out for all the other players to see, and watch them try to piece your card order back together from the words you wrote on the Clover. It sounds like such a simple idea, but in execution, Clover is absolutely genius. Just by the nature of its design, it gets people talking around the table, contributing ideas, questioning the suggestions of others, and discussing the moral character of the person who set the clues. And that alone is so important to me, whether the person is into board games or not, regardless of whether they may not wish to be put on the spot like in something like Werewolf, or whether they do not wish to learn the slightly more involved rules of Scout or Railroad Inc. Clover makes it incredibly easy to get involved. And, in fact, even if someone decides they'd rather sit this one out, it usually isn't long before they start chiming in as well. Looking back on the list, number 1 really couldn't have been any other game. As far as filler games go, and social deduction games as well, Fake Artist Goes to New York, to me, is damn near perfect. It takes the concept of social deduction and twists it by making the entire table collaboratively draw a picture, one line at a time. Pretty much the entire table knows what they're meant to be drawing, except one person, the fake artist, who has to make sure that once the masterpiece is done, the players cannot figure out that they were the clueless one. It has all the usual interactivity of the genre. However, I found that the fact that you have that little notepad with physical evidence of what everyone has drawn makes the discussion so much better. The game actually feels like a proper deduction, with players grilling each other about why they've drawn something the way they had, or defending their own vision of what the picture was supposed to be. The most brilliant part is that because you are limited to drawing just one continuous line at a time, it can actually be fairly easy for the fake artists to disguise themselves, as the game almost incorporates elements from Chinese whispers, with people misinterpreting what someone else had drawn and throwing the whole thing off. So, quite often, the one getting the most blame is actually someone who knew the whole thing they were doing all along. I have played this with experienced gamers, I have played this with friends who have never touched a board game before, and Fake Artist Goes to New York has never failed in creating countless laugh-out-loud moments and impressed gasps as the player who you least suspected turns out to have been the fake artist all along. Fake Artist Goes to New York is my favorite filler game, and it would take one hell of a game to knock it off its place. Now, just before we wrap this up, there is one more game I would like to call out, a particular dishonorable mention you should stay as far away from as possible, Muffin Time. When it comes to top 10s, I generally prefer to keep it positive, use them to celebrate the best that our little hobby has to offer, but oh my god, fuck this game. It's meant to be one of those quick, inverted commas funny games, but this bloody thing just goes on and on. The basic premise is similar to Uno in that the first player to get rid of their entire hand of cards wins, but there are so many random bullshit effects thrown into the game that it becomes nearly impossible. I think I've played this game about 3 or 4 times. Each of those has lasted for well over an hour, and I'm not sure that we actually ever had a proper winner. I think we just ended it because everyone was desperate to do something, anything else. If I could burn every copy of Muffin Time out there, I would. But for the time being, if the only thing you take away from this video is that you should not play Muffin Time, I will consider it a small victory.